Great. Thank you, Professor Devo, and thank you, Dr. Harn, for inviting me to speak here. And thank you all for coming out to hear me. My name is Steve Barr, and as you heard, I'm a retired professor of theoretical physics and the president of the Society of Catholic Scientists, a group which started in 2016 and now has grown to about 2,700 members worldwide, of whom about two-thirds, as you heard, have doctorates in a natural science. I strongly recommend that you visit our website. The Catholic writer George Weigel has said that it is a treasure trove of fascinating materials. It has a lot of educational material on it that would be of interest to students and teachers. Now, some people say that religion and science are incompatible, that you have to choose between God and science. You can't believe in both. To those of us who are Catholic scientists, this is a strange claim. Far from seeing science and religion as in conflict, we feel them to be deeply in harmony. Some of the same things that make us Catholics also led us to do science: a sense of wonder, a passionate desire to know the reason behind things, and a deep conviction that everything holds together in some coherent way. For us, both the Catholic faith and science make sense of the world. Science tells us about the things that we can observe and measure. Our faith has a much wider scope and answers deeper questions about the ultimate cause of the world's existence and order, the purpose of human life, and our ultimate destiny. It tells us about spiritual realities, about God and man, love and truth, sin and redemption, good and evil, things that natural science cannot tell us about. The Catholic faith and empirical science are two perspectives on reality, and indeed see the world in different ways, but not in conflicting ways. I've been a scientist for almost 50 years and a Catholic for 72 years, and I know of no scientific fact or well-established scientific theory that conflicts with any Catholic doctrine. So why do so many people seem to think that there is a conflict between science and faith, science and religion? Well, one reason is that some people lump all religion together. Every example of superstitious beliefs or magical practices they come across is evidence to them of the irrationality of all religion. Another reason is that many people fail to distinguish between science itself and a certain philosophy that is often called scientific materialism. Now, what is scientific materialism? Well, materialism is the idea that all reality is reducible to matter and its behavior. Scientific materialists are people who think that materialism is somehow implied by modern science. This is an opinion that is held by many scientists and by many people who claim to speak in the name of science, but it is not science. It is a philosophical opinion. Now, if matter were the only reality, as materialists say, then God, of course, would not exist. But neither would human spiritual souls. A human being would be nothing more than a complex structure made of atoms, and everything about a human being would therefore be ultimately explicable in terms of the laws of physics that govern how those atoms move and interact with each other. In other words, scientific materialism doesn't just imply that God does not exist, but that, strictly speaking, you don't exist either, at least not in the way you thought you did. The popular astronomer and science writer Carl Sagan put it this way in one of his books. He said, "I am a collection of water, calcium, and organic molecules called Carl Sagan." Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, in one of his books wrote, "You Your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. So, some of the idea that religion and science are incompatible comes from intellectual prejudices. Prejudice against religion and prejudice in favor of materialism. But people who say religion and science are incompatible also base their position on arguments. What kind of arguments? Well, mainly three types. One kind of argument is basically philosophical. It says that religion and science just see the world in completely contrary ways. Science is based on evidence and reason, while religion supposedly is not. Science gives us natural explanations of natural phenomena, while religion invokes God and supernatural explanations. The second kind of argument is historical. The claim is that historically, science and religion have always been at war, that religious people and institutions have opposed science and tried to hold it back, and that on the other side, scientists have generally been opposed to religion. This is called by historians of science the warfare thesis, or conflict thesis. The third kind of argument is based on the actual discoveries of science, which atheists claim have disproved much of what religion has taught about the world, about human beings, and about our place in the world. Let's begin with the philosophical arguments, and let's start in particular with the supposed opposition between the supernaturalism of religion, of biblical religion in particular, and the naturalism of science. Christianity and Judaism were never based on supernaturalism if we mean by that a rejection of the idea that there is a natural order. In fact, scholars tell us that the book of Genesis was in part an attack on the supernaturalism and superstition of ancient pagan religion. When Genesis said that the sun and moon are lamps placed by God in the heavens to light the day and the night, it was attacking the paganism that worshipped the sun and moon. When it said that man is made in the image of God and is to exercise dominion over other creatures, Genesis was, among other things, attacking the paganism in which human beings worshipped and bowed down to other creatures or to gods made in the image of those creatures. In paganism, the world was filled with occult forces and populated by numerous deities, gods and goddesses of the oceans and forests, of wind and fire and lightning, of sex and fertility, and so on. Jews and Christians, however, taught that there is only one God, who is not to be sought within nature, not within its phenomena and forces, but outside of nature, a God who is indeed the author of nature. In this way, biblical religion helped strip the physical universe of divinity and made it into a natural world, no longer the abode of gods, but merely the creation of God. And since God is good, the natural world was seen as something good and worth studying. And since God is intelligent and wise, the world he made must reflect this. It must therefore have been made according to principles and laws that can be discovered and understood by reason. Biblical religion then taught that there is a natural order which comes from God. What characterizes this natural order and reflects the rationality of its creator is precisely that it is orderly, harmonious, and lawful. Consider this passage from the letter of Clement to the church in Corinth, written about 97 AD. As you know, St. Clement was a bishop of Rome, listed in ancient documents as the third pope after St. Peter. This is a very short excerpt from a very long letter. He said, "The heavens, as they revolve beneath his government, do so in quiet submission to him. The day and the night run the course he has laid down for them. Sun, moon, and the starry choirs roll on in harmony at his command, none swerving from its appointed orbit. Laws of the same kind sustain the fathomless deeps of the abyss and the untold regions of the netherworld. The impassable ocean and all the worlds that lie beyond it are themselves ruled by the like ordinances of the Lord. Upon all of these, the great architect and Lord of the universe has enjoined peace and harmony." Or consider this passage from the Latin Christian author Minucius Felix, writing around 200 AD. This is in a work directed to his pagan contemporaries, telling them why they should believe in a creator God. He said, "If upon entering some home, you saw that everything there was well tended, neat, and decorative, you would believe that some master was in charge of it, and that he was himself much superior to those good things. So too, in the home of this world, when you see providence, order, and law in the heavens and on earth, believe that there is a Lord and author of the universe more beautiful than the stars themselves and the various parts of the whole world." Look at what these ancient documents point to as evidence of God, not to supernatural phenomena or to miraculous departures from the order of nature, but to the order of nature itself and its lawfulness. The ancient argument was that if there is order, there must be a giver of order. If there is a law, there must be a lawgiver. Now, God was the lawgiver not only to Israel, and not only to mankind, but to the cosmos itself. God says in Jeremiah 33:25, "When I have no covenant with day and night, and have given no laws to heaven and earth, then too will I reject the descendants of Jacob and of my servant David." Psalm 128 tells of God establishing the sun, the moon, the stars, and the heavens by a decree or law. The idea of God as a rational lawgiver helped give birth to the idea that there are laws of nature. The idea of mathematical laws of physics, in particular, stems from René Descartes and Isaac Newton in the 17th century. And Newton was very, very clearly and explicitly, and as well Descartes, attributed these laws to God as lawgiver. Even some atheists concede that the religious origins of the idea of physical laws. For example, the eminent biologist Edward O. Wilson suggested who was a non-believer, and suggested the following as the reason that other great civilizations, so in particular Chinese civilization, for all their great, impressive scientific achievements, did not produce a Newton or a Descartes or the idea of universal laws of nature. He wrote, "Why no Descartes or Newton? Because Chinese scholars had abandoned the idea of a supreme being with personal and creative properties. No rational author of nature existed for them. Consequently, the objects they meticulously described did not follow universal principles. In the absence of a compelling need for the notion of general laws, thoughts in the mind of God, so to speak, little or no search was made for them." Now, this is a non-religious person saying this. Our faith, of course, does teach that there are supernatural realities, such as divine grace, for example, that have effects in the world. But the word supernatural, which means above the natural, would make no sense unless there were a natural order in the first place. And the concept of miracles, which are extraordinary events that go beyond what is naturally possible, presupposes that there is a natural order that determines what is naturally possible and what isn't. There is no logical contradiction between the idea of miracles and the idea of a lawful universe. For the same lawgiver who established the laws of nature can also suspend or override them. Because he made the rules, he can make exceptions to them for the sake of some greater purpose. And the greater purpose for which God is willing sometimes to suspend the laws of nature is the salvation of human souls. As we shall see, the men who led the development of modern science in its first few centuries, the pioneers in uncovering nature's laws, such as Isaac Newton and Descartes, were almost all devout Christians who believed in miracles. Now, there's a lot of confusion today, even among religious believers and even among Catholics, about how nature relates to God. Instead of seeing God as the author of nature, they see God and nature as somehow opposed or in competition. And so that if something has a natural explanation, then God has nothing to do with it. And conversely, if God is the cause of something, why then it must be supernatural. Many therefore look for evidence of God only in what is outside the course of nature or inexplicable by science, that is, in the gaps in our scientific understanding of the world. Hence the expression, the God of the gaps. And atheists think that by closing those gaps in our scientific knowledge and understanding, they will leave no place for God to hide. But the traditional Christian view is quite different. If God, as creator of the natural world, established its laws and gave things their natural powers, then his existence is evident in nature itself and its ordinary processes. This is the message of the following passage from the Book of Wisdom, or one message. The Book of Wisdom, one of the last books of the Old Testament, written about 50 BC. For all, this passage is directed towards sort of the scientists and philosophers of ancient Greece, the physikoi. And he's taking, or the author's taking them to task for not having recognized the divine author. He said, for all people who were ignorant of God were foolish by nature, and they were unable from the good things that are seen to know the one who exists. Nor did they recognize the artisan while paying heed to his works. But they supposed that either fire or wind or swift air or the circle of the stars or turbulent water or the lights in the heavens were the gods that rule the world. If through delight in the beauty of these things people assumed them to be gods, let them know how much better than these is their Lord. For the author of beauty created them. And if people were amazed at their power and working, let them perceive from them how much more powerful is the one who formed them. For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their creator. Now notice that the evidence of God to which this scriptural passage points consists of phenomena and processes that are perfectly natural. Fire, wind, the circle of the stars, turbulent water, and the lights in the heavens. Now, medieval theologians distinguished two ways in which God acts in the world. He can act directly in a supernatural manner, for example, turning water into wine. Or he can accomplish his will through the operation of natural causes and processes, which in the terminology of theology are called secondary causes. It has always been the Christian view that God ordinarily acts in the latter way, through the natural. In the words of the scholastic theologian Francisco Suarez, God, quote, writing in the either the late 16th or early 17th century, God does not interfere directly with the natural order where secondary causes suffice to produce the intended effect. This principle was important for the founding of science, for it implied that when confronted by some puzzling event or new phenomenon, we should look first for natural explanations of them. Superstitious people tend to see the supernatural in every unusual or strange event. But this was criticized by the great medieval scientist theologian Nicholas Oresme, who was a bishop of Lisieux and also a genius in both mathematics and science. In explaining the marvels of nature, Oresme said, there is, quote, "there is no reason to take recourse to the heavens, or to demons, or to our glorious God, as if he would produce these effects directly, any more than he directly produces those effects whose natural causes, we believe, are well known to us." Another great medieval scientist and philosopher, Jean Buridan, wrote, "The philosophers, which what scientists were called in those days, they were not called scientists, they were called natural philosophers. The philosophers explain such marvels by appropriate natural causes. But common folk, not knowing of causes, believe these phenomena are produced by a miracle of God, which is usually not true." In other words, we should first seek appropriate natural causes rather than jumping to the conclusion that something is a miracle. That's why the Catholic Church, in its canonization procedures, does not declare a miracle to be worthy of belief until it has excluded the likelihood of natural explanations. Now, this brings us back to the critical distinction, theological distinction, the crucial distinction between primary and secondary causality. Oops, I should have had these quotes up for you. I'm sorry. Between primary and secondary causality. I think the failure to grasp this distinction is one of the main reasons that some people see a conflict between science and religion. This distinction is most simply explained, I think, by a simple analogy, and maybe by using the terms vertical and horizontal cause rather than primary and secondary. The analogy is to a play or a novel. So consider the play Hamlet. Now, I remember reading that in high school, and I remember that the character Hamlet kills the character Polonius, who is eavesdropping behind a curtain, by stabbing Polonius with a dagger. So let's ask the following question. What caused Polonius' death? And let's take a vote, okay? So raise your hand if you think the cause of Polonius' death was that he was stabbed by Hamlet through a curtain. Raise your hand. Good, because I wasn't lying when I told you that. Now, raise your hand if you think that the cause of Polonius' death was that Shakespeare wrote the play that way. Okay, you should raise your hand. Now, this is not 1960, and it's not Chicago, but you should have voted twice, okay? Because they're both correct. Each one of those is 100% the cause of Polonius' death. The cause of Polonius' death, the cause within the plot of the play, is Hamlet stabbing him. But the overarching cause, the cause of the play, of the whole play and its entire plot, is Shakespeare. There is no competition or conflict between these two levels of causality. By analogy, the natural causes operating within the plot of the universe, which are studied by everybody, including scientists, are horizontal or secondary causes, while God, as the author of nature, is the vertical or primary cause. And the analogy makes clear just how silly it is to treat evolution and creation as alternatives to each other, as both fundamentalists and atheists do. Did this species of animal, this hippopotamus or crocodile or giraffe, did it arise by natural processes such as sexual reproduction, such as biological evolution, or because God wrote nature's plot that way? Both. This also makes clear why scientific materialists are wrong to think that we believe in God without evidence. For materialists, evidence means either directly observing something with our senses, or inferring that something exists as the natural cause of what we are observing. The way we observe a compass needle move, and we infer the existence of something else which we can't sense, namely a magnetic field, as the natural cause of the compass needle moving. But of course, God cannot be observed in either of these ways because he's not a part of the universe. He cannot be sensed because he's not a physical entity. He's not a part of the natural world. And he is not a natural cause within the universe like a magnetic field or dynamite or something. God is, we don't infer him as to exist as the natural cause of things that we observe. So the atheist was right up to that we don't know God exists in the same way we know that a physical object exists. And yet, God is a cause. He is a cause, the ultimate cause. He is not a cause within nature. He is the cause of nature. And so, nature gives evidence of God in the same way that a play or novel gives evidence of its author, even if the author does not make an appearance in the book or the play. Now let's turn to history. And let's look at the claim that religion and science were historically at war with each other, the so-called conflict thesis. Okay, so there's the punchline of the previous part of the talk. So were religion and science at war, the so-called conflict thesis? There was a time when even most historians of science believed this. But today, historians of science will tell you that they are unanimous, in unanimous agreement that the conflict thesis is just flat wrong. And that it is in fact a false narrative, a myth that was to a large extent created by two men, or at least they helped popularize it enormously. In 1874, John William Draper wrote a book called The History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. And in 1896, Andrew Dixon White wrote A History of the Conflict of Science with Theology in Christendom. These books went viral, as we would say today, and had a vast influence that continues to this day. Much of what most people think they know about the historical relation of science and religion comes originally from these two books. But now Draper's and White's books are regarded by professional historians of science as completely worthless and filled with mistakes, distortions, and things that were frankly made up. The myth that these two men helped to create was that there were two separate groups of people, religious people and institutions on the one hand, and scientists and the scientific community on the other, engaged in an intermittent but fierce struggle through the centuries. But this picture can be shown to be false by a very simple fact. For most of the history of science, the scientists and the religious people were not in two separate groups at all, because almost all scientists were themselves religious believers. Modern science is the result of what is often called the scientific revolution, which started in the 1500s and really exploded in the 1600s, which was the century of the scientific revolution. So let's look at the great names, the greatest scientists of that founding era. Here are the greatest ones, the top 21. Did these scientists, I put even the greatest of the great, the ones I show the pictures of, and then another, I think 14, or no, there are 8 of them there, another 13, just put the names. Did these scientists, these were the people who created modern science, did they see themselves as being at war with religion or rebels against religion? Not at all. Nothing can be further from the truth. Starting at the top, Copernicus was himself an official of the Catholic Church. Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion, was a devout Lutheran, whose scientific works were filled with religious meditations and prayers. I took one out of the university library, a scientific treatise, half of which was prayers and meditations. One of his prayers was, "I thank you, Lord God, our Creator, that you have allowed me to see the beauty in your work of creation." That was the attitude of the great scientists who founded science. They were not rebelling against God. They were thanking God that they had helped to uncover the beauty, some of the hidden beauty in creation. Galileo remained a practicing, believing Catholic till the day he died. René Descartes, who invented the use of coordinates, was not only a great mathematician and scientist, but a great philosopher who argued philosophically for the existence of God and of the human spiritual soul, and who declared himself a believing Catholic, and there seems to be no reason to doubt the sincerity of his profession. Blaise Pascal, a genius. Hold on a second, I got a silly message on my computer. Let me just get rid of it. Blaise Pascal, a genius in physics and mathematics, was a devout Catholic whose life was radically transformed by a mystical experience, and who wrote one of the most famous religious books of all time in defense of religious belief and against religious skepticism. Robert Boyle, called the father of chemistry, was a devout member of the Church of England, who said that he liked to do his scientific experiments on Sunday because they were a form of worship. Isaac Newton, the greatest and most important scientist of the scientific revolution, indeed of all time, perhaps, spent as much time in studying scripture and theology as he did on mathematics and physics. Most scientists were religious believers. By the way, every one of these 21 people up here was a devout Christian. I cannot find an example from the scientific revolution of an atheist scientist. Most scientists were religious believers well into the 1800s. For example, the 2 greatest physicists of the 1800s, most people would say, were Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell, who were mainly responsible for developing the theory of electricity and magnetism, among their other great scientific achievements. They were both deeply devout Protestant Christians. So for most of scientific history, indeed up to the very time that Draper and White wrote their books claiming a war, most scientists were quite religious. What about the Catholic Church? Did it make war on science? Was it hostile to science? Doesn't the Galileo case show this? The short answer is no. The Galileo episode was, however, a dark spot in the Church's relationship with science. There's no blinking that away. But it is important to understand that it was highly exceptional. It was really the only dark spot in the Catholic Church's otherwise glorious 800-year record with respect to science. One fact that dramatically illustrates this is the large number of Catholic priests who made great scientific discoveries over the course of those many centuries. I don't have time to list all of them. There are many. But here are the three greatest. Every Catholic should know their names. The top right is Gregor Mendel, an Augustinian monk who is considered the founder of the science of genetics. At the top left is Georges Lemaitre, the fellow standing with Einstein. Georges Lemaitre was a Belgian theoretical physicist and mathematician and Catholic priest who proposed what we now call the Big Bang theory of cosmology. and also the idea that the universe is expanding. And at the bottom of the picture, we see the Danish scientist Nicholas Steno, who is the founder of the modern science of geology. Steno also made important contributions to the sciences of anatomy and physiology, and Steno's law in crystallography is named after him. But his greatest discovery was how sedimentary rocks and fossils form, which really started the modern study of geology. He was a convert to the Catholic faith, later became a priest and then a bishop, and was named a blessed by Pope St. John Paul II in 1983. So here are three founders of three major branches of science who were Catholic priests. Here are three other priests who were founders of branches of science. On the left is Father Angelo Secchi, an Italian Jesuit priest of the 19th century, who was the first to systematically study the sun and stars by analyzing the spectra of their light, and to use this to classify different types of stars. This was the beginning of the field of astrophysics. In the middle is a picture of the 17th century French scientist Mersenne, a priest of the Mennonite order. He and Galileo are considered the founders of the science of acoustics, which is the study of sound, and Mersenne was a major figure in the scientific world of his time. The historian Peter L. Bernstein called Mersenne, quote, the center of the world of science and mathematics in the first half of the 1600s, the center of the scientific world. And the Dictionary of Scientific Biography calls him one of the architects of the European scientific community. And finally, on the right is a picture of a French priest who is considered the founder of crystallography, the scientific study of crystals. I just showed you a few important scientists who were priests to underline how much the church as an institution has valued scientific research. I could have shown you many more. And of course, I could have shown you a much, much larger number of great scientists who were lay Catholics. You can find information about many of these great Catholic scientists, both priests and laymen, on the website of the Society of Catholic Scientists. We actually have curated biographies, very short biographies of about 100 really great scientists who are believing and practicing Catholics. I can't talk about all of them now, but I'll show you a slide with the names of some of the greatest Catholic scientists of the 20th century. You're not going to read those, but I'll just tell you most of them have Nobel Prizes. It includes the discoverer of radioactivity, the discoverer of cosmic rays, the co-discoverer of neutrinos, and pioneers in medicine. Now, the last person on this list I will tell you about is Juan Martín Maldacena. Maldacena is considered by physicists one of the greatest physicists of our era. One way to measure the impact of a scientific research paper is by how many times it is cited by other research papers. I list on the right of the slide the 5 most highly cited research papers in fundamental physics of the last 60 years. Now, note number 5 on the list is a paper by Stephen Hawking, the great Stephen Hawking, and it has, as of the time I made this slide, about 11,976 citations. Number 3 on this list is a paper by a fellow named Ed Witten, whom I'll mention again later. Witten is widely considered the most brilliant physicist alive today. In fact, they've taken polls of physicists, and a majority or plurality vote Ed Witten as the smartest physicist on the planet. Okay? He is truly astonishing, the brilliant physicist. But what about number 1 on the list? Number 2 on the list is a paper by Steven Weinberg. Is actually the central paper of what's called the Standard Model of Particle Physics. He's a Nobel Prize winner. What's about the most cited paper, the number 1 on the list? The most cited paper is by Juan Maldacena. In this paper, Maldacena made a huge breakthrough that is considered to have profound implications for the understanding of both gravity and quantum mechanics. Now, Hawking, all of these four I mentioned, Maldacena, Weinberg, Witten, Hawking, are great scientists. Hawking was an atheist. Witten calls himself a skeptical agnostic. Weinberg was an atheist. But Juan Maldacena is a practicing Catholic and a member, I am proud to say, of the Society of Catholic Scientists. So now let's turn from, by the way, I should say, he is up there, and he is regarded as intellectually, scientifically, in the same league as Hawking and Weinberg and Witten. So now let's turn from talking about scientists to talking about the actual discoveries of science. And in the last few minutes of my talk, I'm going to, many atheists say that the actual discoveries of science have undermined Christian beliefs. Are they right? Well, it is true that by the year 1900, and even earlier, many people thought that the discoveries of science up to that time had painted a picture of the world that didn't look like the picture that religion had painted of it. However, as I will now show you, there were some plot twists in this 20th century. Some of the most important discoveries of the 20th century changed the scientific picture so that it started to look, in many ways, much closer to the religious one than to an atheist or materialist one. I'll tell you very briefly, just one slide on each, about 5 of these major plot twists. So, should have shown you this slide before. Again, by 1900, many people, not just anti-religious people, but many thoughtful people thought that the discoveries of that up to that time were showing us a world that just contrasted radically with what the religious picture of it. So let's look at one of these 5 plot twists. First, the older science had strongly suggested that the universe had no beginning. The idea that the universe had a beginning started to be dismissed, I'm talking about around the year 1900, started to be dismissed by many people as mythological and superstitious and contrary to science. But lo and behold, along came Einstein, who proposed his theory of gravity in 1915, and based on this theory, Father Georges Lemaitre proposed what is now called the Big Bang Theory. In the 1960s, very strong evidence started to accumulate that there was a Big Bang about 14 billion years ago, and that the universe probably began at that point. The second plot twist is that the older science, starting with Isaac Newton, had strongly suggested that the laws of physics determine the future uniquely, leaving no scope for free will. In other words, it seemed that the equations of physics are so powerful and predictive that given the state of the universe at one time, everything that happens after that can only happen in one way. It's called physical determinism. This idea made many people lose their faith. This was one of the greatest blows to religion, really, in the history of religion. It came from what's called classical physics and the idea that the laws of physics uniquely determine how events will unfold. So people began to believe that free will is an illusion, and without the idea of free will, Christianity kind of falls apart. But in the 1920s, the discovery of quantum mechanics showed that the laws of physics do not uniquely determine the future, but only determine the probabilities of future events, and therefore do not rule out the possibility of free will. Third plot twist. Have some celebratory music. It's quite appropriate. Number 3, the older science, starting with Isaac Newton, that's the second one. I'm going backwards in time. Okay. The older science seemed to say that human beings are just an accident in a universe that was clearly not made with us in mind. Bertrand Russell famously said that we are a curious accident in a backwater of the cosmos, and there are many other atheist scientists and philosophers who say similar things. But in the last few decades, physicists have realized that many features of the universe and its laws are just right to make it possible for the universe to have living things in it, such as ourselves. Now, even 25 years ago, this idea was very controversial, and some scientists who were atheists refused even to consider the idea or to take it seriously. But now it is generally admitted to be a fact. I'll just quote I can quote two great scientists. Stephen Hawking, an atheist, in his last book, written in 2010, he's admitted, he said, our universe and its laws appear to have a design that is tailor-made to support us, and, if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. That is not easily explained and raises the natural question of why it is that way. So people admit, even atheists, that the laws of physics look very much like they have numerous features that are just right to make life possible. Now, there is a naturalistic way to explain this which should not be laughed at. It's a very serious idea and may have truth in it, and that's a multiverse idea, which I don't have time to talk about. The other person I'll quote, Ed Witten, who, as I said, is a skeptical agnostic, he calls himself. He said he does not believe in any religion, said in an interview, the fact that galaxies, stars, and planets roughly like ours could have formed, and that living things roughly like us could have formed, depends on many details of the laws of physics as we currently know them, being just the way they are, and not being slightly different. I think we'll never resolve the sense of wonder about that. Okay, the fourth plot twist, I'm just about done. The older science had revealed a universe so vast that it seemed to point to the insignificance of Earth and of human beings in the cosmic scheme. But now we know that it takes billions of years to produce the chemical elements needed for life, and then billions of years more for complex life to evolve. And Einstein's theory of so you need the universe to last for billions of years if complex organisms like us are going to show up on the scene. And Einstein's theory of gravity shows that the universe cannot last for such vast times unless it is also vast in physical size. Indeed, as vast as our universe is. So the vastness of the universe, rather than being a sign that we don't matter, is a precondition for our existence, given the way the laws of physics work. The fifth and final plot twist I'll talk about is that the older physics seem to have a place only for matter in this picture of the world. And this led many to think that only matter is real. But quantum mechanics seems to require that there be both physical systems that are measured and so-called observers who make those measurements. And an argument that goes back to the 1930s suggests that the observers, and in particular their minds, cannot be completely described by the equations of physics. Minds are something more than matter. This remains a highly controversial point. Most physicists would dismiss it out of hands because they are imbued with materialist prejudice or just because it sounds strange to them. This is very controversial, but some great physicists, and including ones who are not religious, have argued for it. And their arguments have never been refuted. I'll just quote two great physicists who did. Sir Rudolf Peierls, a leading 20th century physicist, said, quote, on the basis of quantum mechanics, he said, the premise that you can describe in terms of physics the whole function of a human being, including its knowledge and consciousness, is untenable. There is still something missing. And Eugene P. Wigner, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, wrote, it will remain remarkable in whatever way our future concepts develop that the very study of the external world led to the conclusion that the content of the consciousness is an ultimate reality that is not just reducible to matter. And finally, there's a fact that isn't a twist in the plot, but is something that has become increasingly clear over the last century. Namely, that profound mathematical concepts are needed to describe the physical world. This has suggested to many physicists over the last century, even those who are not traditionally religious, that a mind is behind the world that we see. I will quote one great physicist who is also a great mathematician, someone whose name I've already mentioned, Ed Witten. He won the Fields Medal, which is the highest, like the Nobel Prize in mathematics, but he's also considered by many of the greatest physicists in the world. Though not religious, he was asked in an interview, why is it that such profound mathematical ideas are needed to describe the physical world? And he answered, it is as though the world had been created by a mathematician. So here I'll end. The Catholic Church and her members have a great and glorious history of contributing to science. And many of the latest discoveries of science have revealed a world that fits much better with a religious view of it than with atheism. Thank you.